Last time we took a step towards answering one of the big questions left from part A. How do we coordinate many trades at the same time? How do we pick an exchange rate when it changes who benefits from the exchanges taking place? And how do we pick even where to live on the production possibility frontier? We got a step closer to resolving these questions by introducing prices as a way of organizing Molly's decisions for producing spinach. And we did this with the supply curve. You may already see how a pricing mechanism can help us figure out how much spinach Molly can make. But we left last time without answering where prices actually come from. In some sense, we've simply pushed the question of where to live on the frontier one level deeper by introducing prices. Okay, we have prices going on. How does this actually answer our big questions? Well, we're about to fully resolve this question with a concept called equilibrium. But first, we need to develop a model similar in spirit to the supply curve, but for buyers. Before we return to spinach, I'm going to show you some data I collected with an experiment I run in my classroom sometimes. So this is data for chocolate bars, and this is a fake student called Amanda Grace. And I'm asking her how many chocolate bars she'd be willing to buy at a range of prices. So at $2, Amanda Grace isn't willing to buy any. So we have a quantity demanded at a price of 2 of 0. So Amanda Grace is willing to buy 0 chocolate bars from me at a price of $2. At a price of $1, this goes up to 1. So we've lowered the price and we've increased the quantity demanded. At 50 cents, her quantity goes up by a little bit more. At 25 cents, it goes up even further. And then at 10 cents, it goes up by quite a bit. One thing you'll notice about this graph is that as we lower prices, quantity demanded goes up. This is inverse to the supply curve. As prices go up, quantity demanded goes down, which is opposite of the law of supply, which told us that as price goes up, sellers are willing to sell more. But as a buyer yourself, you probably feel this. As prices go up, you're going to switch to doing something else. Switch to maybe a different brand of chocolate. For now, we're going to think about how good each one of these exchanges is for Amanda Grace. So we're going to simply look at one individual exchange. We call consumer surplus the buyer's extra benefit from an exchange. So for this one exchange, let's say Amanda Grace is only paying 50 cents, but Amanda Grace is willing to pay $1. As we've already shown on the earlier graph. Her consumer surplus is 50 cents. She walks into the store, she's willing to pay $1, but she only has to pay 50 cents. She's spending 50 cents because this is a good deal for her. She's willing to pay more than what she actually has to pay. So she will engage in this exchange. Her consumer surplus, as we call it, is 50 cents. It's the extra value to her from this exchange. It's not something we can easily measure. We simply have to ask. And it's not something you see on a sticker representing a price. This is simply just the extra value to her for engaging in this exchange. If the price was higher, let's say at $1.50, Amanda Grace would not engage in this exchange because her willingness to pay is below the actual price. So we see no expenditure and no consumer surplus because Amanda Grace is not buying this chocolate bar. If we lower the price down to exactly $1, this becomes a bit ambiguous. What I've represented here is that Molly isn't engaging in this exchange. Her willingness to pay is $1. She could pay $1 if she wanted to, but she's kind of indifferent. So we're going to say she doesn't actually engage in this exchange. but she equally, could engage in this exchange. And if that were true, we'd have an expenditure of $1 because Amanda Grace would be buying the thing for $1, but her consumer surplus would be 0 still. So in either case, Amanda Grace would have a consumer surplus of $1 if her willingness to pay is $1. Consumer surplus of 0 if the price is $1 and her willingness to pay is $1. Okay, so we can run through a bunch of different prices, but the main idea is that we have a consumer surplus for all of the things we're actually buying. Individual demand is every possible quantity demanded for an individual, which is this entire line. If we were to run through each one of the possible prices and ask Amanda Grace what her quantity demanded, we could pick a bunch of points and represent them on this graph. One way we do this is by simply just running a line, sort of connect the dots style, through these different points. This entire yellow line represents her individual demand curve. It's every possible point her quantity demanded at every possible price. So one thing we do in this class is represent these complicated looking individual demands with a line. This is what we would think individual demand might look like in reality. But this line is pretty complicated. There's a lot going on here. So in this class, we're going to make our lives simple and represent individual demand and demand curves generally with a linear relationship like this. It's not going to change any of the results we talk about this semester. And if you have more interest in studying more complicated demand curves, there are many more classes for you. So when we talk about a demand curve, one of the things it allows us to do is ask questions about prices and quantities. So for Amanda Grace's now simple sort of linear demand curve, we can ask how much is Amanda Grace willing to buy at a price of 25 cents? How many chocolate bars is she going to buy? Well, we can take this price and plug it into the demand curve, just like we did with the supply curve, and that will tell us a quantity demanded. So in this case, that's 18.75. This responds to changes in prices, right? So as we raise price a little bit, our quantity demanded goes down by a little bit. And when we raise prices by a lot, quantity demanded goes down by a lot. Now, just like we did with the supply curve, we want to understand not just the consumer surplus for one exchange, but we want to understand it for all exchanges in this market. And in this case, Amanda Grace is buying 18.75 units. So we have to go through and add up the vertical bars for each one of these exchanges. So we're including vertical bars here to capture the extra benefit from each one of these exchanges. I'm showing purple below to represent her expenditure in total, because she's buying a lot of chocolate. So consumer surplus is this green area, which we can represent with a triangle, just like we did for producer surplus. And when we raise prices, consumer surplus becomes smaller. And it becomes smaller for two reasons. One, the vertical bars have now gotten shorter for the things we're exchanging after the price has gone up. So these bars here, those get shorter. So our producer surplus is now smaller for that reason. But for another reason, quantity demanded has gotten smaller. So there are actually fewer things that we're generating consumer surplus from. So both the height and the base of the triangle are getting smaller which makes the area of the triangle smaller overall for both of those reasons. All right, and we could play around with some other numbers as we like, but this is the core idea. Just like with the supply curve, the demand curve can also shift. So if we change preferences, so if Amanda Grace decides she likes chocolate way more than she did in the past, then we would see a shift out in the supply curve. Excuse me, in the demand curve. So that would be a shifter. On the vertical axis, remember what the demand curve is doing. It's telling us how much this individual would be willing to buy at that price. And then we would see the demand shift if the price of related goods changes. So if you're buying spinach, if the price of kale goes up, then you're less likely to buy kale and you're more likely to buy spinach. So if the price of kale goes up, then you're going to buy more spinach. So the price of related goods can impact our preferences as represented by the demand curve. And if you're able to buy more with a higher income, then that changes your willingness to pay, how much you're going to buy at a range of prices. That will shift up or shift out if your income goes up. Okay, so the last one is buyer expectations. I'm going to reference the textbook. Take a look at chapter 4 if you have more questions about any of these things. I'll see you in the next one.